Hello, in today's video I'm going to go over the murder of Katherine Lillian Armstrong. It's dubbed as the Newcastle Halloween murder, which is probably what I've put in the title. But I've gone over that. This is a shorter one, so I haven't done anything crazy makeup wise, and some of it was done off camera, like brows and lips, to make sure that finishing my makeup matched up with the end of this story. But there is a lot of theories throughout this video. All opinions are completely my own. I will say and label when it is a theory and when it's not anything that the police have said. I will put where I got my information down below and any makeup links down below. I just wanted to make it very, very clear that theories are my own or pointers that I've read on the internet. I don't want to be disrespectful towards any of the families in these videos, so I hope that that is really clear. Hello, so I've started off with skin prep today. All the products that I've used throughout this video will be put in the description below. I'll link them all, including what you don't see on camera. I'm probably also going to do my eyebrows off camera today, especially where this is a shorter case. I don't think I'm necessarily going to have enough to talk about to do my eyebrows as well. So I'm literally just going in my foundation. So today we start off with 70-year-old Katherine Lillian Armstrong. I'm going to refer to her as Lillian Armstrong the whole way through this because that seems to be what her name is shortened down to throughout all of the newspapers and coverage of this. We're at number 12 Goldspink Lane in Newcastle upon Tyne. So Lillian was a retired school headmistress, very independent, lived by herself. A lot of the articles that I read referred to her as a spinster. I'm not 100% sure how flattering it is to call someone a spinster, so I'm not going to refer to her as that, but she's definitely very independent, lived by herself, very proud woman, very organised and very routinely, and that's one of the things about this case that you'll see later, which actually helps the case be picked up quicker. So this is Halloween night of 1963, and again, I am aware that with this case being a sort of Halloweeny case, I'm kind of at the wrong time of year for it, but I actually found this case interesting for reasons that I'll list later. And Lillian Armstrong is in her house getting ready to go to choir practice at 7:30 p.m, which she did every single Thursday. She'd been at this church for 40 years and she'd been going to choir practice for just as long. And she'd actually been a retired school headmistress since 1957, so for at this point for about 6 years. So I can imagine that the church probably became even more so a lot of what she did with her life, but she was very, very devout Methodist. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that helps this case is how routinely she is. So when her friend Ada Ridley comes by the next morning, that is how I'm going to pronounce her name. I'm really, really sorry if that's wrong. But that's how I've chosen to pronounce it the whole way through. Ada Ridley comes by her house the next morning at 10:30 a.m. At this point, she's knocking on the door, which she does routinely. Again, it doesn't tell me whether it's every morning or every Friday morning. I just know that this isn't unusual. These two are friendly enough that it's not unusual for Ada to come by and knock on her door. And obviously, with Lillian being a routinely woman, it shocks Ada when the door isn't answered. Lillian is an early riser, and when Ada realises that Lillian isn't going to come to the door, she actually calls the police, again really, really worried, which is one of the things that gets this case going really, really, really quickly. So when Ada calls the police, they actually come round almost right away, it seems, from what I can see. And after a few knocks, when they realise they can't get in, they force the entry and they find her at 10:50 a.m. wearing a dress and slippers. However, she is absolutely covered in blood. There is marks, stabbing marks on her face and her neck's tied with a nylon tight, which obviously raises massive alarm bells. Stabbings to the face and neck usually hallmark a personal killing because it is so passionate to have stabbed someone in the face or neck. In the post-mortem though, they find out that it actually isn't the nylon tie that was the cause of her death, which again, if you can imagine yourself at the scene, you can imagine that would be your immediate thing. You would think strangulation, but it actually wasn't. It was the shock and blood loss of being stabbed, and they actually find in the post-mortem that they believe her to have been stabbed no less than 28 times, which again is very, very intense. Usually you do see massive amounts of stabbing in cases where the killer knows the victim. Again, because it's the face or neck, it could just have been trying to make sure that they'd finished the job, as nasty as that sounds. So obviously, with her being stabbed 28 times, the scene was very, very bloodied. It seemed like a very frenzied attack. That is the quote that I remember reading. I will leave links for the information that I got down below. But they did mention that it was a very frenzied attack. But the problem was, even with the amount of blood on the scene, and even with the admittance from the police that this could be more than just Lillian's blood, at the time I was reading an article that said that at the time they would have only been able to test blood on a blood type level, which obviously isn't super handy. I did read some articles where people were theorising that if any DNA had been kept behind, maybe it could be tested now. I haven't seen anything, so I'm assuming that they don't have anything left to test, particularly since the police themselves have said that it would be DNA that would crack this case open. One of the things I found interesting from the post-mortem was actually the defence wounds on Lillian's hand again, and this, for me, when reading, wasn't super unexpected, because the amount that Ada had mentioned about her being very independent, I can imagine that she would have fought back. And the wounds on her hands in the post-mortem do come up with that conclusion again. As they initially searched through the house, they found that there is no forced entry, no ransacking, she hadn't been sexually assaulted. Again, her clothes were completely on her. The only thing that I will note that I found interesting is I did see in a lot, there was blood around the house, and she was in the entry to her home. If there's blood around the house, and this again was something that I found noted in another article, if she's in the passageways of the house, again she's soaked in blood, it looks like she's been left there, not transported. It seemed like she had been killed in that entryway to the door, which again kind of makes sense with the theory that there was no forced entry, because it is a very possible theory that whoever killed her, she let into the house herself. But for there to be blood throughout the house, that to me means that even if the person who killed her, or the persons that killed her, didn't steal anything from the house and robbery wasn't their initial motive, they've still gone around the house anyway, because otherwise I see no reason for there to be blood. I just thought it was an interesting theory that they mark off no forced entry and nothing had been stolen, but yet there's blood throughout the house. And upon searching the house, they find no weapons, no footprints, no fingerprints, which again at this stage in the investigation is very worrying, because the chances then of you actually finding the killer are slim. Again, upon talking to people like Ada, they find no visible motive, no obvious suspects, and that throws their investigation in a bit of a loop from the get-go. However, they do put together a 60-strong team of police officers and detectives. They even recalled people who were on leave to get them to come in and help with this case, which to me again just marks how much they wanted to be able to solve this case. Again, I don't know whether that was because of her status, having served as a headmistress for so long, or whether it was because of her age, or just they were a genuinely good police department, or whether it was a thing at the time. But it almost takes me aback sometimes, especially where reading the more American cases, how quickly this case got taken seriously, because a lot of the time you do see cases go a lot slower. So they start searching bins, drains, gates, parks, streams and gardens in search of this weapon, and they believe it to be a long-bladed weapon. Again, long-bladed weapon could mean anything. I have no idea what kind of weapon they mean by that, or what long to them means. I couldn't find it anywhere on the internet. It's always just called a long-bladed weapon. But they planned one of the biggest house-to-house inquiries, and they actually planned to speak to 5,000 people, and I think it was in a 0.5 mile radius, which 0.5 miles doesn't seem necessarily huge, but when you literally think half a mile out from your house, again, I've seen the street map of the house. If I can put it up on the screen, I will. it does seem like that would have been a lot of people, and again 5,000 people tells you how many that would have been. So by November the 4th they had actually taken 200 statements, and they were midway through the every door for 0 to 5 mile radius search and speaking to, but not one person had any information. They had no idea what could have happened. Nobody that I've read seemed to come up with a motive or a suspect. And at this point Scotland Yard had been brought in. I saw in some places that it was after this 0.5 mile radius search, and then I saw in other places that it was a few hours into the investigation. I'm going to go with the fact that it was a few hours into the investigation, just again because immediately they found no motive, no suspects, no sign of ransacking, no fingerprints, no footprints. I'm going to assume that when they found all of this was when they brought Scotland Yard in, but again, just bear in mind that on some places it does say a few days in. Again, with this being historic and in 1963, the coverage of it isn't the best. So the Met sent Eric Reed down, and Reed was massively into utilising the press. He went on to the Newcastle Evening Chronicle and mentioned that he thought it could be more than one person. He mentioned the theory that he thought it could be teenagers who entered the house on Halloween. They also mentioned that they were investigating men who had been convicted of committing crimes on older women, because again, unfortunately, that is a subcategory in itself. So I've come back with my eyebrows filled. So again, I do know that one of the other problems that they had whilst investigating this case, especially when Scotland Yard came in, was that they struggled with the timeline. They had 18 hours to fill, again, where she's living by herself, even though she had Ada coming round. And again, this seems like it was a regular thing. I don't know how regular, it's not covered in the newspapers that I read at least. But even though this was a regular thing, it's still very, 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 very hard to fill a timeline for someone who is by themselves. And so they had 18 hours to fill. She had last been seen at 6:30 p.m, an hour before she was meant to be at choir practice, by two children who had seen her looking out the window as they were passing by. Again, this was Halloween, so in 1963, I can't guess how busy it would have been or how much people were into it, but from what I've read, there was enough people out that nobody could necessarily pinpoint who went into the house, and nobody had any idea. And by 1964, the police had spoke to 16,000 people about this case. So again, a massive, massive effort by the police. I can imagine she was probably quite a big focal point in the community, because she would have taught a lot of kids and oversaw a lot of kids in the local area, I can imagine. And unfortunately, not much more happens with this case. I couldn't find anything about recent findings or recent investigations. Again, I had seen an article from the police. I can't actually recall, again I'll put it down below, but I can't actually recall whether it was one of the ones who was on the initial investigation. I just know that he was talking about how if there was DNA at the time, if it could be tested now, then that could be the gateway to finding who actually killed her, or if it was one person or more than one person, because again, it had been theorised from the get-go that the blood in the house could have been from more than just Lillian, which again to me seems very believable. Where she had the defence wounds on her hands, it seems likely that she could have made someone bleed, or that they could have injured themselves in stabbing her. It's just unfortunate that at the time of testing, again I was reading that it was only blood types back then, so it was very unlikely that we were going to find who the person was. I did read a lot about interviews with the Newcastle Evening Chronicle, and Ada actually did one too, where she theorised that it could have been teenagers as a Halloween prank. Again, that would have had to have gone extremely wrong. I'm not belittling that at all. I have also seen the theory, and again, it did cross my mind, that where she was a headmistress, again, she would have overseen, I can imagine, a lot of people in the area. And it did cross my mind as to whether maybe, even though they couldn't find a motive, so again, this is fully my theory, maybe it was people's in the past getting back at her for something. Again, this does seem very extreme for that, but it is just a theory. And with the two methods of trying to kill her, once by having the nylon tied around her neck via strangulation, and then stabbing her so many times, often I was reading that where there's two methods of killing, they usually theorise that it was two or more people. So again, that's something to consider. But again, they did investigate men who had committed crimes against older women. I did actually find mention of one suspect. Again, it came up to no end. But detectives looked into a man from South Shields. He was a prime suspect in the murder of Amy Barrett. He battered her to death a year earlier, but the connection was ruled out. Again, that just shows that they were actually actively investigating men who'd committed crimes against older women. It's really, really sad that these happened a year within each other. Again, both older women from what I could read. I also found another thing that I thought was quite interesting. Again, you have to take this with a pinch of salt. But obviously this was in 1963. This house has been lived in since. However, after the time in 1963, once initial investigations were over, new people came into the house, and I did read from a new tenant, Joan Black. She'd given the Chronicle a interview saying that she had suspected a haunting in the house. Again, you kind of have to be wary of this, because it was said that there was a figure at the bottom of the stairs that was watching with a watchful eye. Again, Lillian was found in the entryway of the house. I don't know the floor plan of the house, but most places I feel like that I've lived in personally have had stairs at the bottom of the house, so it seems almost like it could be quite possible that these are details that are taken from the newspaper. Again, with a watchful eye, she was watching outside the window the last time that she was seen. Again, I'm not too sure how to take stuff like that. Whenever I hear things from like psychics or about hauntings, I always try to take it with a pinch of salt. It's not something I personally believe in. I do think it makes cases more interesting for sure, and I'm not discrediting what she said at all. She believes that, and that's perfectly okay. I'm just saying I would take it with a pinch of salt, and some of the details that I could find in that newspaper, again, I'm just paraphrasing this, that she said, but some of the details I could find in the newspaper were specific ones that kind of matched up with what was from the original case anyway. But again, where she wasn't found till 10:50 a.m. the next morning by police, there is that gap in the timeline, and she was meant to be at choir practice at 7:30. We have no idea if she was even intending on going that night. Again, she could have been ill. There are numerous reasons, so even though we know she never got to choir practice, we don't know whether she was killed in that window from 6:30 till 7:30, or whether she was killed at any time throughout the night. Again, we have no way of knowing if she was actually intending on going to choir practice that night. So there's no way of telling what hours that could have happened in. So it does really, really open up this case, which is what I thought was really interesting about it. And again, unless there's DNA, I have seen police officers say that they thought that DNA would be the key to this case, and that unless there is any to test, it's very unlikely that they're going to find the killer from 1963. Even if it was a teenager, the killer is likely to be very old now, if not dead themselves. Which again is very sad, because it means that they're never going to be brought to justice again for such a horrific crime. Because again, you do have to remember that throughout this, as much as she is independent and she has been a headmistress up until 6 years ago, so she is still a 70-year-old woman, and I feel like this is very horrific. Again, with the two methods. But that's what I found interesting about this case, is just that there's no motive, there's no suspects, but there's so many theories. And again, they have all spoke to the Newcastle Evening Chronicle. But that is it for that story. I couldn't find any more details. Again, I will try and leave the articles below. Any makeup that I've used, I will leave down below. In future, I will try and do a little bit more, but where this case was shorter, I just wanted to do like a really, really basic everyday makeup look and film it for you all. I couldn't put too much on camera because again, the case is shorter. But for next week, I am planning to do a bigger case. So it'll mean that I can do a lot more on camera, but I hope you're happy with this video. Regardless, and I hope you found the case interesting. It is interesting to think up your own theories, especially where this is so open-ended and there's nothing in the way of there's no super strong details. Even with the weapon, where they said long bladed weapon, they haven't given anything super strong, so it is one of the interesting ones to theorise. But that is all for today. If you could like below and subscribe, notifications will help. I'm going to be uploading these true crime videos every Thursday at 4, and I'm going to be uploading a makeup, clothing or lifestyle video every Sunday at 9. And I have got my Sunday video planned out for this week. All social media will also be down below. But I hope you enjoy till Sunday.